A common question is, how can I avoid conflict? However, avoiding conflict isn't actually what you actually need to do and really isn't even that good for you. So how can you solve conflict or even accept conflict and do so while maintaining your own integrity? Today, we're going to be talking about that with an expert, Liz Kislik.
Welcome to Advance with Mike Acker, the podcast designed to help entrepreneurs, business leaders, and professionals alike break through barriers by improving their practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Your host is a best-selling author, executive coach, and founder of the Advance Public Speaking School and Advantage Publishing Group, two companies dedicated to providing an edge for leaders. Find out more about Mike at mikeacker.com. Now here's your host, Mike Acker.
Liz, thank you so much for being on the program with me today. Welcome.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad to be with you.
Now, in just a moment, we'll talk about who you are and what you do. But why can it be good for companies, for organizations, for the people that make these companies up to have conflict?
In the real world, if there was only one opinion per organization, it would actually be very hard to accomplish anything useful. Part of how we figure out what's really important and what the best ways to approach a situation can be is by discussing our differences of opinion. Otherwise, how could you strengthen anybody's views?
I disagree with you completely. No, just kidding. That's just some conflict.
And that's cool.
Good. Okay, I like it. So conflict, and we're going to dive into that together. We're going to have a conversation. Who knows? There might be conflict of ideas in it. But before we dive into that, because I love your answer there, moving things forward, that there's got to be uniquenesses and differences. Why are you a person who this is really, really good to speak on this topic? What's your background? What do you do so that our audience knows why you're the person speaking to us about this?
I'll answer the background part of that first. Not only have I had a practice for more than 30 years in management consulting and executive coaching, and also contributing pieces to both Harvard Business Review and Forbes, but when I was 23, I ran a 300-person call center. And starting out that way and experiencing all kinds of conflict before I was really ready to handle it.
Yeah.
And from then on, I was just really curious about how people operate, why they set themselves up to disagree sometimes, and why they don't when they should. It was just a topic of fascination because I cared about the work getting done and getting done well. And this was clearly part of it. And the other piece, to answer the other part of your question, for some reason, although I dislike conflict intensely myself and prefer not to have it, I was able at crucial moments to say things that needed to be said. And so it has turned out that I can facilitate conflicts and help people see that they can find some common ground and some ways to approach things, or to figure out when are those circumstances where you should really leave well enough alone.
That was really good. I like that background. The 23-year-old, the 300 people, it just seems like more than I would ever want, no matter how old I am, managing that amount of conflict. You know, one of the things that I found was interesting, and I'm sure you're familiar with this writing as well, but Patrick Lencioni talks about conflict in one of his books. And I can't remember, I think it's do you remember which one it is?
I'm thinking 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yeah, I think it is. And he actually talks about it in several books. I think Death by Meeting, he also talks about it. And when I read it, and I think I actually was 23 when I read his book on Death by Meeting, he talked about the need for conflict and really that you can't advance something. And I know that that's not always how we feel. So can you talk to us about our aversion for conflict? As someone's listening to this going, okay, no, I don't want to be in conflict situation. First, talk to us and help us understand what is our aversion to these situations.
The first thing I'd say is we probably label it as conflict when there's discomfort, we don't like it, we don't want to do it, we think it's bad. When we think we're just sharing opinions, how you tweak some aspect of a product or even where you're going to go for dinner. When you're just talking about it and you don't feel rancor and you don't feel discomfort, we don't think about it as conflict. I think we name it conflict when we think we're arguing or fighting or having a bad time with each other. And there are loads of reasons, but one of the reasons that is so clear is people don't want to be the bad guy. People don't want to be perceived as the person who says harsh things or somebody you have to fight with or someone that other people would be against. And so we are often avoidant of conflict because we don't want to hurt anybody.
It's an identity issue.
We don't want to be mean. Yes, we care about how we're perceived. And we're often afraid that if we are seen as the bad one or the mean one, even I'm talking about people in very senior executive roles, that other people won't like us and we won't be able to work well with them. So that's major. Another thing, though, maybe it's more primal, we're afraid we'll lose.
So if someone's listening to this, they're driving their car, listening to podcasts, or they're tuning in on YouTube, checking this out, and they're going, okay, I don't like conflict. Those are some different reasons that they might key into right here. And I don't want to lose. What do you mean by that? The primal, I don't want to lose.
So the reason there's a conflict is two people or two departments disagree about how the work should get done, sometimes even what the work should be, what the outcomes should be, who's responsible for which things, who gets credit, who takes the blame, who gets the resources, all of those things. There are some examples of this in the TEDx I did about conflict and why there's so much of it at work. And sorting this stuff out, we think of it as like coming armed for battle instead of just sharing views and assessing views and taking the best of everything. Often people come thinking that either I'm going to win or I'm going to lose, and it's binary. And as soon as you get into that frame of mind, there's actually more conflict because you've kind of anticipated that someone else is going to be coming at you. You're going to have to defend or attack.
It's us versus them. So you go into this work environment. I'm trying to even think about some of my own work environments now. And you almost go, if I bring this up, it's going to get us into a win or lose situation. And I don't want to lose. And there's a good chance I could lose. Or if I could just, it's not that big of a deal. I just won't say anything. And so we get into that passive mode. Or we have some aggressive ideas about it because we're very aggressively for this idea, but we're passive on our behavior. And so because we're not wanting to go into the conflict, but at the same time, we're not totally wanting to leave our ideas behind, we go into this passively with an aggressive intent, and we get passive aggressive communication. I do a lot of communication talk. So this running away from conflict, it really can bring up all kinds of discontent. And if I was to surmise, this is just me talking off the top of my head, it could be one of the reasons why a lot of people are leaving their jobs.
Oh, in fact, there is research now that shows, particularly for women and for people of color, one of the reasons that remote work was actually better for them. And remote work is not better for everybody under all circumstances. But one of the reasons it was better for them was because they could avoid conflict.
Is it avoid or postpone?
Depends on the circumstance. Sometimes conflict postponed long enough is actually avoided. Very often circumstances will change And so that particular one will evaporate, and that particular Tuesday doesn't feel so terrible. It's like every day you don't have to have the fight. That might be a better day.
Okay. So we want to avoid it because we got some psychological, we got some primal, we got some really good reasons. And I'm sure everybody here goes, yeah, okay, I know, Mike, I don't want conflict. But why shouldn't we? Why is conflict actually good? Because that's one of the things that we're talking about, accepting conflict. And then we'll talk about how to solve it. But how can it actually be good for us as a company, even as people?
So let me just pull an example out of the air. Say in the round of appraisals and pay raises this year, you feel your team is not getting what they deserve. That seems like a good potential conflict to have, certainly a good debate, in which you might be making the business case for why your folks deserve more money, and being able to show all the negative things that might happen if they don't get it, so that it can be well considered. Sometimes this is just a discussion with your boss. Maybe your boss agrees, maybe you split the difference, maybe you walk away disappointed. Sometimes it is about representing your team when several other managers are representing theirs, and you want to make sure that your people get their fair share. All of those would be worthy reasons to know that you might have to have some conflict. As for why it's better for an individual, it can feel really, really icky to be in a conflict. It feels terrible to know that you did not take care of something you were responsible for. That idea, think about, have you ever seen any of those videos of like dog rescues when they talk about the dog's tail being so tucked and the dog being shut down? If you don't represent what is actually important to you in your work life, if you feel like you folded, that can be hard to live with.
I'm reminded of Schindler's List. And you remember, have you seen that movie, Liz?
I do not see movies that are very upsetting. So no, I haven't, but I'm aware of it. Yeah.
There's just this moment at the end where Oscar Schindler, Liam Neeson, he thinks through, like he ended up doing the right thing and saving a lot of Jewish people. And at the very end, he has one of those moments. It just came to me. I haven't seen that movie for well over a decade. And yet at the very end, it's almost like, but I could have done this. I could have done this. And of course, the people come to him and say, but you did this.
Right.
It was this very emotional moment. But as soon as you said that whole thing of it, deeply unsettling for us to just do that, I mean, it becomes another identity issue.
Yes. So first of all, we're really, I'm going to say, unskillful at assessing ourselves fairly and calmly.
Mm-hmm.
If we are dedicated to a cause of any kind, and it could just be, gaining more market share. It doesn't have to be a totally moral cause. But if we are dedicated to a pursuit and we feel we didn't give our best, it's common and reasonable to take yourself to task for what you could have done better, particularly if you're focusing on how you could do better next time. It is not effective, though, to be self-punishing, because nobody learns that way and it's hard to improve that way. So having somebody remind you of what you did accomplish really is important. But that's not our main topic. Right.
And we'll talk about the solving now, because this is going to be really good. So we see that it's okay for us to not want conflict, not to like it's natural, it's biological in some ways, it's part of who we are. And accepting conflict can be a good thing, can actually be a path forward. I think of it like resistance training to get my biceps to be as big as they are. I mean, you're looking at them just amazed at how big they are. It's because of that's a joke, but it's because of resistance training, more resistance. So how do we actually get through to the other side then? And how do we solve conflict? And what are some keys that you walk through as a management consultant, that you teach on, that we can grab a hold of. Right now, pull your car over if you're driving, pull out your pen and paper, and get ready to write down how to solve some conflict.
The first thing I would say is that it's really important to be clear about what you are actually trying to accomplish, and to make sure that you have your goal in mind and not just your feelings about who you're dealing with, why you don't like them, etc. Because one of the things we really mess up in conflict is when we treat it as being about us versus another person versus our goals and ideas in contrast to their goals and ideas. If you think you're going in to fight a person, pause, pull back, and reconsider what's going on. You're going in for a purpose, for something you want to accomplish.
So no conflict for the sake of conflict because there's an outcome you're trying to get.
And no conflict for the sake of getting another person. Okay. Then, this is very tricky. It's even hard to think about. It's not taking a position on the conflict like, I have to come out with such and such an outcome or I have failed. First of all, that can make you avoidant, as we've discussed before.
Yeah.
But second of all, it can give you tunnel vision in the discussion and close you off so that you don't see where there might be other possibilities that are not the thing you went in planning to get, but that might also be good. Maybe they're part of the way and you can come back and get the rest again another time. Maybe there's some way of sharing the situation with someone else, so they're now on your team for your purpose and they'll help you in the group conflict. There are all kinds of reasons that going in open-minded makes you more flexible and quicker to notice when there is an opportunity in the conflict. If you go in with a kind of binary, it's this or it's nothing, you're in a brittle position. Brittle leads to breakage. That's not so great. What you want is to be able to see what's happening and navigate so that you come out with something useful, even if sometimes it's only a commitment to have the discussion another time. Okay, so these are both backdrops. Then I've got a huge list of it depends, Mike. Because are you the person with the hierarchical power or not? Has this case been made before or not? Are the people, like there are a million of these, and all of your listeners will know that they've been in different kinds of conflict that vary. So then the other issues have to do with being prepared to make your case in a way that is likely to persuade the people who are hearing you. So it's knowing your audience. It's like anything else about making a business case. It's not about the fighting. It's about how to share the ideas and showing their benefits and their detriments for the people you are trying to persuade.
Okay, so know the goal, have an openness to it. It's more like that Alex de Tocqueville on America. He talks about the free marketplace fight. John Stuart Mill, was it? John Stuart Mill, the free marketplace of ideas. It's not discussion for the sake of winning, but it's discussion for the best idea to win, the ultimate outcome. Have some openness. And then there's a whole bunch of depends. And so give us some of these scenarios, because what if my guess is that a lot of people listening are not necessarily the one in the hierarchy. So what happens? What are some best practices when you're not in the hierarchy?
So if you have to persuade people who are senior to you, you need to find, okay, so this depends too, because it depends on your organization, but
there's a lot of depends.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Know your data and then know stories that show it to its best advantage. One of the things that is not useful, sometimes it's easier to teach by contrast. One of the things that's not useful is when somebody comes in to make a case and says, a lot of people want this, a lot of anything. Actually know your data and then be able to tell a particular story that illustrates it. That's the, big-eyed puppy approach.
Yeah.
Because just the data won't sell it, but you need to be able to share the data to back up the good story. The two things work hand in hand.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about the same. Yeah. So you go in with your hierarchy, your boss, your manager, and you have a case, you don't like something that's happening, hours going back into the office, whatever it is, but you have some data to back it up. Here's the data that backs this up. And Liz or John or Carlos or whoever it is, and you have a story about that, or you have a story that you read about something and bring it in. I like that. That goes actually with communication. There's the classic 3 elements of persuasion. Logos, you got pathos right there, you got that story, and then of course you got your own character in there as well, your ethos.
Yep.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so now you're sort of laying out your case.
Yeah.
And let's say your boss says, well, we can't do that. So that might not be a conflict anymore. That might be, we can't do that, and you got to take your ball and go home. The conflict would come in if, say, you felt that 2 of your team members were really flight risks, and they're 2 significant people, and it will hurt whatever your initiative is if they go. So then you have to tell more of the story about what might happen and why it's so important, etc. Before you do that, though, please try to acknowledge what it is that your boss is saying. Okay. Make sure they know you heard them, not that you are just blindly coming at them again, because then it feels like an argument to them, and you don't want that if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
And when you are positioning that, here's the one to really watch out for. Do not say, I understand that we don't have this, and these other things that you've said are true, but forget that. And I'm sure you teach this all the time, Mike.
Yeah, get rid of the buts.
Right. The way I think about it is, I understand everything you've said about this and this, and I see how or why that matters, et cetera, et cetera. I'm done with the sentence, period. Pause. Then start your next point. I want to explain, if you don't mind, why I think this other thing. Or let me show you how maybe if we put these 2 things together here, we could adjust something over there. So agree and show that you are a good soldier, because frankly, if you are in the hierarchy as opposed to on top of the hierarchy, when decisions don't go your way, unless you're going to leave, you're better off showing that you can and will support what the authority is saying.
Right.
And that you are really on the team. That's a way to avoid other conflicts. But it's worth positioning something twice if you think the other person is worth hearing it. 3 times, not so good. That's an argument.
Right. What do you get if that 3rd time does happen? What's your recommendation at that point? Like it, or really where you just feel like it's not something that your ball can be picked up and brought home. What do you do then?
Right. So some of this will depend on whether you feel you have something else compelling to say, or you just want to kind of put down a marker. So if you've got something else compelling to say, you can say, I hope you don't mind my bringing up this other thing, and then bring it in. Sometimes the only thing you can do is preserve for yourself the right to come back again. You can say, I got to tell you, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm going to go and think about the things you've said. and see how I can make it work. But I may want to come back and talk to you about it again. I still have some real concerns. Let me see what I can work through now. That, I think, shows more openness, no resentment. We're on the same team, but no, I may be back.
I think that's great. It's worth repeating that sometimes it's just worth letting people know that it's something you're going to come back to. And to put the bookmark in it takes your own time to maybe even come up with some more reasons why that you're really for this, or maybe you can drop it along the way and come with some humility.
There's also another option. Sometimes after a time like that, you can go and get some other support.
If it's of a certain size. And
correct. It might be hierarchical. It might be that you check with your peers who are having the same problem and you find out what they're doing with their bosses. It might be that you and two of your peers go to HR and make a pitch. There is always something to do.
What are some deal breakers when it comes to dealing with conflict? Like stay away from X, Y, and Z.
That is a question that no one has ever asked me before. That's really good. So one of them is, don't insult anybody.
What? That's stupid. What do you mean?
Right. Exactly. Then you can't go back. The whole thing about this is you can always go back. Okay. Until you've left the organization, you can always go back.
Yeah.
If you burn a bridge, if you offend somebody, if you tell them their idea is stupid, if you speak to them in patronizing ways, even if they're senior to you, they won't hear from you again. That is maybe my biggest warning. After that, it's things like, don't go in unprepared. If you actually are not prepared, ask for an extension. Try to avoid until you are prepared, because if you misplay your cards, it's harder to go back. I'm always trying to preserve the ability to go back.
I think that one might be more difficult in more personal relationships, because sometimes you don't have time to prep in a personal relationship. I'm just thinking about family type of situations and such. You're on that spot. It's like, well, can I come back to this? No, we're in the middle of the conversation. Don't walk away type things.
Okay. So let me give you an alternative to that, because it's in personal situations that some of these things are the most important. And then what you're doing is not exiting the conflict, which I agree with you is terrible, but saying, I need to take a pause. Can we take a little break? Let me get a glass of water. Anything to give you half a minute to think. It's the thinking that's important, because in a conflict, our bodies are involved. We're juiced up. We're full of adrenaline. We do whatever our natural things are. We hunch our shoulders, or we cross our arms, or whatever our natural self-protective tells and gestures are, we do them. Anything we can do to be very conscious of mind-body connection, relax ourselves, helps us be more open, and not so much in fight, flight, freeze, fold kinds of modes, but in curious mode, in opportunity-seeking mode, maybe even in humor-seeking mode. And by the way, if you are in a conflict, watch out. This is another big warning. Watch out very carefully for sarcastic humor, and don't do it. Just don't do it. It will not read the way you mean it, or it will read exactly the way you mean it. And either way, it could be bad.
Yeah, this is such good stuff. As you're talking about that, the arms crossed, I'm listening with my arms crossed. Cut to me holding my
that's a different thing. So first of all, this is not arms crossed. That's actually thoughtful, and you need a place to put your elbow so you can hold your chin. No, it's all good.
I just thought it was a little fun thing, as I noticed it earlier. I did have my arms crossed. But the other thing that came to mind as you were doing this, as you were talking right there, was the whole Johnny Depp and Amber Heard issue. which I have no idea what really happened. So I'm not trying to speak to that. I had read in one case that, of course, it was his defense who said that the reason why he acted the way that he did, which is bad on both people's side, was that she wouldn't let him take a pause. And he would say, according to his defense, that I need to take a pause. And she would do whatever she could to keep him in the heat of the moment. Whether that's true or not, who knows? And I'll leave that for the tabloids, which I'll probably not read again. But I thought it was really interesting in terms of conflict, that if you're the person who is in the heat of the moment and the person is asking for a pause, it's not they're saying, hey, I don't want to have this conversation. They're just saying that I'm emotionally unable to continue in the heat of this. Is that correct?
Maybe.
Okay, maybe. It depends. It depends.
It depends, because if you have two trusting people and one says, let's take a pause, the other will say yes. If someone has used pauses as a way to, forgive this expression, but I'm using it purposefully, rearm. And if that's the history and the habit, well, I wouldn't want to give a pause either.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so you were so right about saying you don't know what happened with them, but beyond we don't know what happened with the immediate situation that they're talking about, there's a history there and habitual behaviors, and we all have them. And sometimes looking only at this 15 minutes means you are actually missing the real story.
That's good. Okay, so people are driving, people are listening, people have tuned in, they're on the side of the road right now, and all of a sudden they have a conflict come to mind. When you think of workplace conflicts, what is your experience are like the highest ones? I'm sure there's tons of different ones, but what are the most common conflicts that people are having in the workplace?
Okay. I'm going to give you a couple of different kinds.
Okay.
One kind, incredibly common, happens in virtually every organization, is that departments that have differing goals, where the goals often are not easily reconcilable, the departments end up in conflict because people don't know how to work through those real differences, say production and sales.
Yeah, that one's always, sales are saying, we can take you to the moon. Production's like, we don't know how to get you off Earth. Yeah.
Right. So that kind of thing is one of the most common, very historical classic. Right now, the issue of, are we going back to the workplace and in what form? And by the way, when I say, are we going back to the workplace, I mean the physical workplace and the segment of people who haven't been there all along. You know, if you were actually operating a machine, you were in the workplace. If you were hands-on with a patient or with food or with whatever it is, you were already in the workplace. So this is for that segment of the population that was able or forced to work remotely. Here, you have a great deal of conflict about a larger area, which is really about autonomy and choice, and who gets to make the choice and determine the level of autonomy. And that kind of power dynamic often leads to conflict because people have different needs and goals.
Yeah. I was talking with some people and their workforce is moving away. So how do you pull them back? What do you do in that situation? Very, very interesting. And other people who are dealing with that. What kind of interpersonal conflict, or actually, let me back up on this. As you've been talking, I've been thinking about pride a lot. In my own life, pride has played a factor.
All of us.
Some conflict. And I specifically think about one of my more embarrassing job histories where pride was a big part in some deterioration of some conflict. And so I want to get some counseling. No, just kidding. For you though, when it comes to pride, what play, like what place do you see pride in a lot of these situations? Or are there other factors like pride that you see very relevant?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful question. So if pride doesn't let you make way for others, then you're stuck. Then you are basically dug into a position and you cannot afford to shift. And anybody who cannot afford to lose or can't afford to shift will be less nimble, resilient, creative in coming to the best solution. So even if they get the thing they want, it is very unlikely to be the optimal solution. So that's one way in which it really gets in the way. The other thing that can happen with pride, or ego might be another way to call it, is that sometimes people think it's not worth it. This person's pride or ego will be affected. And then they'll come back at me in some squirrely way. This is the kind of thing that can create avoidance. And this is something, sometimes unwittingly, sometimes not, that leaders do. They don't mean to act like you can't bring me a problem or you can't bring me a difference of opinion. But if your team members think that you can't tolerate hearing the thing they want to say, they may not tell you. And then there could be all kinds of crucial customer data, employee engagement issues, a host of things that could be going wrong that you actually don't get to hear about.
So I would almost separate that from pride and insecurity in that regards. Pride is almost like, in the way that I'm kind of thinking about this, in the way that you responded, is pride is like, look, I'm right. So, and the other one is almost insecurity. Like if you come at me and tell me that, you know, the reason why we're not doing well is because of this, and it's just, well, that just deflates my sense of self. And so I become insecure, and we can't embrace conflict with that person because they're going to fall apart. We can't tell that person they're not doing well because they're going to fall apart. I guess there are different sides of the.
I buy that. Yeah, I buy that. I think that's great. I was actually thinking of a person who would behave almost as if, oh, I can't be bothered with that. I can't be bothered with that. No time for that. No time for you. All of pride is insecurity, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, so we're taking
different facets, I guess, isn't it?
Right. We're in the same ballpark. I think what it all goes back to is that idea of brittleness. I can't take this conversation on in a way where I stay open to it and go wherever the conversation needs to go for the sake of the whole. I'm having personal reactions that cause me to turn away, to throw you out, any of those things.
That's good. That's good. Okay, let's do this. Let's wrap up with a couple of very solid things that people can do, because we've given a couple of those along the way. Like, for example, know the goal of the conflict. But if you're just going to say, let me leave you 3 things, listener, let me leave you 3 things that you can jot down, or one of these 3 things, what would those 3 things be?
Oh gosh, you're really going to limit me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, people can go on. I mean, you're a regular Forbes contributor, a Harvard Business Review contributor, and we'll put all those things out there. You got your TED Talk out there.
Yeah.
So we'll put those out there on the show notes as well as I'll give you a chance for you to talk about where people can find you. But yeah, let's just make sure that people have 1 to 3 things they walk out of here going, this is what I'm going to do.
It's fair. The fact that I don't like it doesn't mean it's not fair, which might be one of the points. I don't know.
Okay. Let's take that. Let's make that point number 1 and talk to this point. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not fair.
Right. Or it's not the right thing.
Okay. Just because you don't like it. Okay.
So that is, have humility in the situation. Second thing, manage yourself so that you can always go back. That is probably my biggest ever.
Yeah.
That it is up to you to go back. And the third thing, which we haven't touched on at all.
Okay, hold on that one right there. Manage yourself. You can go back. Years ago, I was leaving really well. And I was executive director, really great thing. And on my way out, I was joking around saying stuff. Well, since I'm out of here soon, and I didn't say anything bad, but it was like these more abrupt statements. And one gentleman came up to me. He said, "I know that you're joking. I know that you're doing this, but I want to let you know." And he's exactly said that. Be careful that you don't say anything too startling because you want to go back.
Good for him.
Yeah. So good point on that.
Right. And the third thing, which we haven't talked about, sometimes there's a conflict that is actually moral for you, where you just feel that what is happening is wrong, not inaccurate, not mistaken, but wrong. Bad for human beings, bad for the environment, something with which you don't want to be associated. If it's that strong, get out. If you really believe it is so wrong, make plans to go. I'm not saying walk out the door that day unless you have the means to do so.
Sure.
But if you feel that something is that serious, or that there is a series of conflicts which show that certain things you believe are true and right will never come to the surface, find some place that's better for you.
I think that's a very important point. I just read today about a teacher who wouldn't go with the Kremlin propaganda, and she rejected it, rebutted it, stood against it, and it led to some very dire consequences. But there's a person who's not going to violate their own conscience, their soul.
That's right.
And it's going to take her into a awful, horrible spot. She doesn't lose her life, but still she's going to lose it with a sense of self versus that shame, that guilt that can plague people for.
Right. And even if it's not such a big thing,
sure,
sometimes it's worth going on record. I'm supporting this because we've all agreed. I just want to be clear. I think that these consequences may come to pass, and I wouldn't feel right if I didn't share that concern.
Which is the whole point of the Supreme Court dissents.
In a sense, yeah.
Well, there's more to it, but it's one of the reasons.
Yeah. No, that's right.
Yeah. Well, this is fantastic, Liz. This is so much great stuff here in a short period of time. Where can people find you, Liz?
Best place, and thank you for asking, is my website, lizkislik.com, LIZKISLIK, because I've got 10 years of blogging and articles and the TEDx, and there's also, if it's useful to folks, a free ebook there on dealing with the interpersonal aspects of conflict at work. And then you can always find me on LinkedIn, of course, and on Twitter.
Perfect. Yeah, I sent you a request a little while ago about that on LinkedIn, so we can connect there. But it's been fantastic, Liz. And for all of those in management and you're looking at some conflict, reach out to Liz. She has some services in this regards. This is something she does. If you're an executive and you are in a spot where you need some coaching, yes, that's something I do, as you know, but something that Liz does. And she's got years of service in this area. So feel free to look her up at lizkislik.com and check that out. But thank you so much, Liz, for being on the show today.
You asked some wonderful, thought-provoking questions, Mike. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And thank you. And so all of our listeners, I hope that you have a life full of good types of conflict instead of bad conflict, the type of conflict that moves you forward in life. And I'd love for you to share this with someone, to like, subscribe, to comment, to make sure that people who need this content would benefit from this, get it into their podcast or in their YouTube channels. Until next time, this has been Mike Acker with Advance with Liz Kislik.
Thanks for listening to Advance with Mike Acker, a podcast designed to provide an edge for leaders through improving practical leadership skills and increasing confidence in speaking. Mike is a best-selling author and business owner who has helped many leaders increase their skills and their confidence, propelling them to new heights in their personal and professional endeavors. Join an incredible group of professionals taking the steps to become better leaders at connect.stepstoadvance.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.